Hey guys, I want to welcome you to our webinar tonight, our first one of the year. We're so excited to get together here and get a start on planning for 2025. Our heart is that this would not be a year of fear or a year of despair for agriculture, but amidst the things going around us, that we would be a group of people who have hope, who have joy, who have peace, amidst some crazy circumstances, are still able to succeed and have a prosperous year in 2025. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to do kind of a fun style tonight. I'm Kayla Livesey. I'm Rod's youngest daughter. And so we're going to do a little daddy-daughter interview. And we're just going to walk through some questions and really pull from all of Rod's experience. You would think after living with him for 20 years that I would know all the stories and know all the things, but every time we talked, every time we are in the car together, I'm still learning something new from him. And so that's what we're going to pull from tonight. We will just be kind of going back and some forth on some questions, drawing on his experience, having been involved in agriculture in several different facets, having started A Better Way to Farm. I'm really excited to learn from him tonight, and I hope that you are as well. So, ready to get started?
You bet.
Awesome. So let's take us back to the beginning. What's your very first memory in agriculture, and how did that influence your childhood and kind of your college decisions?
My very first memory,
Very first one.
we were living in Missouri. I lived down there for 4 years, and I would have been about 3, and I thought it was really cool that Dad chewed Red Man. And my most very first, and it is a strong memory, was Dad did the right thing. I wanted to do it, and he let me. And I remember throwing up by the milk tank for like what seemed like hours. And it influenced me for the rest of my life
Okay.
because I never chewed again.
Okay, awesome. So maybe after that, being involved in agriculture, what was that like in your childhood?
The same thing, though, sis. At the same time that was happening, it was the joy of being in the barn. It was the joy of working with the cows. It was always the hard work, but the sense of reward that came from doing it. It's mowing 60 acres of hay, and at the end of the day, looking back and saying, I did this. It's building a half-mile of fence and saying, we did that. It's working the cows and getting them all ran through the chute, knowing that we did that. Shelling corn and getting the whole field done. Those are my memories, and it's just that sense of accomplishment that you can get that you can't get anywhere else.
Sure. And how did you growing up in production agriculture influence what you wanted to do in college?
Well, quite. And so it became apparent that, working here on this very farm that we are sitting on today that we bought, where I grew up from 1964 till basically today with a few years hiatus. But, I left and I went to college to get a business degree. And I picked up that business degree and I wanted a good job. That was my goal. I was going to go get a really good job, and, I wanted to be secure and do all those things. And I remember I started work the 1st of June. On the 3rd of July, I was driving to work, and I literally looked at the cab of my truck and I cried out, oh my God. And I was not using his name in vain. I was looking up, praying, oh my God, what have I done? Because I missed Foreman. And as luck would have it, sometimes God sends answers in the way you don't want them. I started on the first day of June. On the first day of December, they called me to the front office. I thought I was going to get a raise because I'd raised production on the shift that I was in charge of a whole shift of people in a factory. I doubled production, and I was going up, I thought, to get my Christmas bonus. And they had all my stuff in a box. They took my keys.
That was nice.
Walked me out like a common criminal. And I realized in an instant that there is no security except that which I create. And so that was a very much an eye opener. It was the 80s. I was one of the first victims of the 80s. They knew things were coming, and they fired me that day because if I'd worked one more day, I could have drawn unemployment. So that was their deal to save unemployment. Merry Christmas, Rod. But it was funny because they canned me on a Thursday, and Monday I was working. And so we've always figured out that we can land on our feet. There's always something else that we can do. And from there, I went into insurance and spent a lot of time writing farm insurance and getting to know that side of things and working off of the business side And when I left that, I did a couple of other businesses on my own, and then I ended up in the seed corn industry. And I spent about 10 good years working for several different seed companies. And that was a great time because I learned so much. Some of it good, some of it bad. The old adage is everybody serves as an example. Some people it's what to do, some not what to do. And I learned how to run a test plot, and I learned how I could win every time by stacking it. No, literally, if I want my hybrid to win, I put it in the low spot and I put your hybrid on the sand ridge. Or I put my hybrid right over the tile line. If it's a wet field, I put yours in between the tile lines, and that gives me a real leg up. And so I learned a lot about, okay, you got to go across the anomalies. All good test plots would go across the tile lines, not run parallel with them. And so those things have really influenced, what we have done. That 10 years of studying and doing tests for the seed corn companies and hands-on production was all good.
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched on something that I want to go back to. You said I was the start of the 80s. And I know, we live in a very agriculturally focused community.
Yep.
And you saw a lot of things in the 80s for agriculture. Talk with me a little bit about what you saw and how it impacted you and ultimately how it led to the mission behind A Better Way to Farm.
Some of it's pretty raw and pretty personal. I had really good friends who got forced out. I saw people lose farms that they shouldn't have lost because they had equity, but they couldn't borrow the money to refinance. Um, I think a lot of those things were hard, and those were hard lessons. And I was determined that at some point in my life, I was going to be able to make a difference, and I was going to be able to stave that off and make it go better. And I didn't want it to be that way. I also learned, I bought my first farm in 1985 in the depths of all of that, because in those times there is opportunity. And so we went after that. It was, everybody thought we were nuts. And I've got some good friends today, and their motto is, if they're not talking about you, you're not doing it right. And so in 85, when other people were selling out or being forced out, we bought a farm. And that was the first farm that we ever bought. And so, but from that was really where that seed was planted inside me. I didn't know how, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to do something to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it came to A Better Way to Farm and you knew, okay, I want to do something to help farmers, how did what you learned then apply to how we run our business today?
Well, number one, the most important thing I learned was don't be like everybody else. Because typically, when everyone is doing something, that might not be a great sign. For instance, right now, a lot of people are bailing out on cattle, and we're seeing those numbers decrease. And here, one of these days, everybody will get back in them, and then they're going to tank. And that's just the nature of the beast. But what I learned in the 80s was that not to do the group think, not to do what everybody said. I spoke 2 days ago, and I told the group, one of the most dangerous things in the world, there's two phrases that really terrify me. Everybody knows, okay?
Yep.
And the other one is everybody's doing it. And we give into peer pressure, and we need to step back, and we need to take a look and analyze what we can do. And I don't want to be, if I do what everybody else does, I'm probably going to get the same results that everybody else gets. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think here we are sitting in early 2025, and I think we need to be looking at doing some things differently, no different than we had to do something different if we were going to survive the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. So, formally educated in business, got some good experience in several different parts of the ag industry. What was the start of the better way to, of A Better Way to Farm? No formal education in agronomy. How did you get the knowledge base that you have now? And how did that lead to the start of A Better Way to Farm as it is today?
Well, the name A Better Way to Farm was, I believe, started in 2012 when we started a Facebook page, and we needed some cool name for it, and that was the best I could come up with. But God sent us a good one, and it's worked well. But my wife and I actually started this, and Sheila's been so critical all the way along through this and helping. But we started in October of '92, and we started studying. We started going to trainings. We started going to the fundamentals of agronomies, and then I started reading books. And I think, sis, honestly, having the business degree, a degree in business and economics, was in my favor, because I started looking at everything from not the emotional side, not the everybody does it side, but from the let's make some money side.
Mhm.
One of the guys that was just at the meeting this past week, one of the things that he sent us a message on, and he said, everybody else is just talking about getting it done. And you guys are talking all about margins per acre and, dollars per acre, dollars per bushel. And that's what we're all about. And I think it also worked well for me because I love agriculture, but to some degree, the industry has been in a cycle of circular thinking.
Mhm.
We think this, we teach this, we send our kids to school so they can learn exactly what we learned. We teach this, they learn that, they send their kid. We got third and fourth generation of people who have all went to the same college and used out of the same textbooks. And sometimes you need a disruptor. And so I actually dug in, the stack of books that I use, and most of those are not new. Most of those are old. And it's stuff that we knew way back, maybe in the 60s, but that we stopped teaching because there were things that served the industry better. And so we've went back to the basics, so to speak, and really started studying all of the essential nutrients. And we've tried to figure out, we're still learning every day how those interact. And so those ratios between nitrogen and zinc and some of the heavy metals that might be put into that, like aluminum. And all of a sudden, when we start seeing those ratios and how that messes with things, it changes everything that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the start. Now paint a picture of what we're seeing now. Maybe there's some people that are listening that are saying, okay, I'd be open to a change, but what will that change look like? How will this actually make a difference on my farm for my family? Share just maybe one or two of those stories
Sure.
that you've got to be a part of.
Well, I mean, I think Chris is probably on here tonight if I was guessing, but we've got a really good friend named Chris. He doesn't live too terribly far from us here. And I've watched this young man and his journey and how his farming operation has unfolded. And when he shared 2 days ago that he beat the 5-year county average for our county, and their farm average beat it by 70 bushel to the acre.
Wow.
Okay. And so that's really important. I think back to our good friend Dan, another good one. I'll never forget Dan, a little rough around the edges. Didn't always talk the way you'd talk to your grandma. And he called me up and he said a couple of things but he just yelled at me. He said, "I don't know what to do with you." He said, "We gave up 100 acres and we have filled every grain bin on our farm. We filled every old junk silo. We have every wagon, every truck, anything that will hold grain is full of grain, and we're not done." And he said, "We have never had this before."
Mm-hmm.
And when you start seeing those, I think of Kurt over in Illinois, talking about the fact that his dad passed away 16 years ago, and there was a new bin that was going up at that time. And, his dad said, "We would never fill this farm. We'll never fill that bin." And he started with us in 20, and in 21 he filled the bin.
Yep.
And as I understand it, he built some more. Is that?
I think they're working on it. Yeah.
Working on another.
Yeah.
And so you see those things happen, and they don't happen overnight. And guys, we don't have a silver bullet. There's not some miracle. But these guys that are doing this are embracing something different.
Mm-hmm.
I heard one of the guys, I think it was Scott, said that he had a friend, and this friend had a fertilizer salesman come to him, and the guy said, "Man, I got to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
I got to make a difference." And the salesman said, "Well, the only thing better than 200 pounds of 1846 is 300." And that was the moment when that farmer left.
Yeah.
Because in that moment, guys, we've got, I talked to a grower sis that he called me and he said, "I lost $100,000 last year." And I went to my dealer, and my dealer said, "Well, I think what we need to do is we're going to put on 50% more dry broadcast." And he's like, "You're not listening. I lost 100 grand." Guys, we can't bleed equity like that. And so what we've got to do is figure out how to drive that cost per bushel down. Really, truly, per pound, per acre, none of that really makes any difference. It's what can I grow a bushel of corn or a bushel of beans or a bushel of wheat for? And that's where we come in.
Yeah. Because
we may not cut your bill any from what you did last year, but we're going to redirect it so that you get more yield. Because honestly, I look at these soil tests. I was looking at soil tests today out of North Dakota, and this guy has manganese and zinc levels that are so incredibly low, and all the NPK in the world isn't going to offset that deficiency that he has in those two nutrients. And so it's about isolating those, and those are things that we've learned over the last 32 years doing the test plots and watching what happens when we do it correctly. But those are just some of the stories. And I think, Kayla, as I look at this, we're getting some heartbreaking messages. People who are, there's fear, they're scared, they don't know what they're going to do. And it's kind of like I'm standing in 1984 again, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And I saw people give up in 84 that if they'd have just hung on a little bit longer, they'd have been okay. And I think what we're here about is saying, let's figure out not how to just to survive, but let's thrive in 2025. Let's figure out how to actually make some money so that we can. This is going to get better. We know that it is.
Yep.
We just got to be still standing when it does. And we can only do that if we don't bleed equity. And so let's redirect the dollars and let's start making some money on a per bushel basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that I love about the stories that you shared is Chris and Kurt have come to be, dear friends of ours. And I say this because I know that they're watching tonight and I know that they would say the same thing. But they're just ordinary people. They don't have the fanciest operations. They don't have the brand new equipment. They're just farming like everybody else because they love agriculture and it's in their blood and they don't know what they do without it. And so it's the being able to help people who, are still on their family farms, who are farming the same ground that their parents did, with equipment that's not brand new. And we're making a difference in those people's lives. And that's what means, the most to me is being able to help people who we see ourselves in, and then creating a team of people who share that passion as well. So you mentioned the 80s a little bit. You said, I feel like I'm standing in 84. How would you apply the lessons that you learned then to what we're going on, what's going on today? Maybe people heard about their grandparents in the 80s, but for people who are now in charge of the operation, they've never experienced anything like this. How would you apply those lessons to the farm economy we're in right now?
I want to come back to that, so you may have to ask it again.
Okay.
I got something I want to say. You've named some people here. You talk about Chris, who's, I believe, a 7th generation farmer. I have a lot of respect. We work with guys. I am astounded at the number of people who reach out and say, I'm a 1st generation farmer. And you got all these people saying, I can't start. And then, it's always one of those deals where, well, it can't be done until someone does it.
Yep.
And I see these guys who are starting 1st gen, and I love those guys and I love working with them. And I love working with the people who are 5th, 6th, 7th. I think of Sam, who's 6th, Chris, who's 7th. I think you're like 14th generation. When we go out and chore together, you're 14 generations that have worked the land and tended to the cattle and done the things. And I love that. And now to answer your question. So what do I do? What do I say? What do we learn out of the 80s? Number one, we're going to have to really pay attention, and we need to tighten up our cost of living. Sometimes, I get people who tell me that once in a while I get a guy and he goes, I just want to, Grandma and Grandpa didn't make very much, but they made it and it was fine. I want it to be like that. Well, Grandma and Grandpa didn't go to Starbucks, and Grandma and Grandpa didn't have 14 streaming services that are only $41 a piece and DirecTV and all of those things. And I think some of us have to be honest and take a good hard look. I had one particular grower who was very upset about how tight things were and how bad they were. And when I tried to get him to come to the fundamentals of agronomy, they were taking off on a 2-week vacation. There's nothing wrong with a 2-week vacation. I love a good vacation, but maybe I need to take it next year. And we gotta change. We gotta figure out, we gotta say, this is what we want long term. And we don't sacrifice what we want long term for what we want right now. That's one thing I learned in the 80s was the delayed gratification to the nth degree. I also learned in the 80s that everything that we do, we got to say, how's this going to pay for it? How is this going to make it better? Quite honestly, we see people who are spending a lot of money collecting data. And it's one of the things that they've got data upon data. They've got books upon books of maps and more books and more things. And yet when I say, how do you turn that into additional revenue? Well, I don't know, And so we've got to be very strategic. If we're going to, in this time, it's got to be, I'm going to think about this, and I am not going to be emotional. I am going to be very pragmatic, and I'm going to set aside my farmer hat. I'm going to put on my business hat, and I'm going to say, this is how I'm going to make money. And if it doesn't make money, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Would there be anything, you mentioned put on your business hat. Maybe there's people watching who didn't go to school for business, went for something ag related, or they just went straight to the farm after college. How would you say we can learn about business in a way that applies to what we need for the farm?
Well, I think one of the things is that what we need to be doing instead of watching the TV is we need to be watching YouTube. We need to be seeking out information. There are I mean, you take classes on everything. You've taken financial classes, correct?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a master's in leadership and a master's in business administration, right? MBA. And yet, in spite of that, I see you taking extra classes, and we can all do that. And we got to know that not every class is going to teach the right thing. Our job is no different than all of the books that I read, and I get information and I see it contradicted by someone who I have tremendous respect for. I see it contradict things that I've studied. And it's our job is to take it all in, and then we have to learn how to sort through it. And for people who are trying to sort through on the business side, there are people out there who are true gurus at working their way through this. And we need to be looking at those people and saying, how do I get a hold of them on YouTube? Where do I enroll in this class? Maybe I need to spend $399 and take a class on how to make this better and go that way. So those are some of the things I'd be entertaining.
Yeah, absolutely. In the business lane, how much do you see off-farm income playing a role in the success of farming operations moving forward?
Well, I have a really good friend out in Nebraska, and we spoke yesterday, and he told me, he said the people who are making it out here, and this wasn't solicited, he was just, he's just thinking out loud. Sometimes, my thoughts escape, but they almost always embarrass me. And I try to not let that happen, but he just had a thought. He goes, my friends that are making it, their wife is an RN and she's making 60 grand, or she's doing this and she's making 50 grand, or she's doing this and she's making 75,000. And that having that non-farm income in this time is really critical because that's the living, and that allows us to not have to necessarily live really super tight. None of us enjoy that, but basically we either are going to have to give up some of our things, or we're going to have to get really serious and say we're going to develop a non-farm income depending on what that likes. And guys, I'm going to share a quick story with you. I have a friend named Ed, and Ed and I were both farming there in the 80s, and things got pretty tough. And I'll never forget when Ed came down one day and he was pretty blue, and his wife had told him that she was a teacher, but she said, we need a second income. We have got to get a second income. And so Ed thought it would be real funny. He went to Pizza Hut. She came home and he laid this application out on the table. He said, honey, I've got great news. We're going to get that. We're going to diversify. I said, you're going to teach school of a day and wait tables of a night. And it was almost 4 days before she spoke again. So I'm going to suggest, guys, that might not be the angle that you want to take. But we may need to be looking, I see guys who are running skid steer services and working for people in town because they're not as adversely affected. I see people doing all kinds of things to supplement that. We've got some people on our team who have said, hey, this system works for us. We can develop a little non-farm income here by helping some other people do the same thing. And it's funny because you take Chris and Kurt and some of these guys that has made a really big difference for, they're really good at sharing the story.
Yeah, absolutely. They're sharing the story because it's their story.
Because it's their story.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've kind of looked back, got from, some perspective. Now let's kind of get more tangible. What are some tangible steps that we can take to thrive as we move into this upcoming growing season?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to do is be realistic about where we spend in our fertility dollars. I want to I can tell you, I won't name the company. I had a company come to us. They wanted us to promote a really, really low cost seed corn with the idea we're going to save our way into prosperity. And I said I wouldn't talk about it on our social media until I tried it. And I will tell you guys that I'm thankful that I only used it in one box of the planter because it went down like fury. I've never had such a hard time picking corn in my entire life. And so I don't know that it's not about buying the cheapest thing. It's about buying the thing with the best value. And in regards to fertility, we have overused nitrogen a lot. And so the first thing we need to look at is say, do we really need to be doing this, or can we figure out how to cut that nitrogen down to 0.6 or 0.7?
Yeah.
Number two, we need to say, take that soil test, spend the $22 on a 40 every 40 and take a test and get a realistic number on those levels, and then say, am I better off to keep blowing a bunch of DAP and potash on this, or are those sufficient to high, but what I'm deficient in is boron or sulfur or zinc or manganese, because those are my limiting factors. And the tangible thing that I want people to take out of here, there's two things. Number one, I want them to leave here hopeful. I want them to realize that there's a better way to do this and they can do it. And number two, I want them to leave here with strategic steps and say, we're going to soil test. We're going to do a complete test. And guys, I'm not going to pull any punches. The Mehlich 3 test is junk. Okay. I'm no more sugarcoating it, because I'm here to make sure you don't get hurt. And when you use a Mehlich 3 test, you get hurt because it's not accurate. It's cheap, but it isn't accurate. And so we're going to pull that. I had a guy I'd never talked to today, and he goes, all right, I'm going to pull my test. I'm going to do the Braze. I'm going to do a P1 and a P2. I'm going to do ammonium acetate on my potassium. I'm going to do DTPA extraction for my micros, except for boron, I'm going to use sorbitol. And I was like, wow, this guy's been listening, Yeah. But those are the things that you're going to do the right test. And then when you get the test and you get the information, you're going to act on it, and you're going to stop doing Einstein said, doing it exactly the same way, hoping for different results, is the definition of insanity. And so let's stop that nonsense, and let's take the test and let's do what it says. And then I would have another suggestion, and I would encourage everybody as they're going out this year, one single tip: go do test on population on soybeans. We see so many guys who are spending seed money they don't need to spend. They're planting 140, 150, 160, 185, 210. And all I'm saying is, do whatever makes you comfortable, but run some strips at 90 and 110 and 125 and see what happens, because that single thing can change the profit fairly significantly, because most of the time, somewhere between 125, 130 is the number one yielder. And obviously, if we can save half a bag of seed to the acre, that's a pretty good chunk right there off the top. And then lastly, we know that there's always budget constraints. And so we take the test, we see the perfect. And then the mistake that we have made is when we say we can't afford that. So we oftentimes, as humans, when we get confused or we get scared, we just sit down and we don't do anything. And I say that because I see people take the test and they want to cut money out. And they say, okay, I'm just going to take out the boron, for instance. That's not right. We start prorating back and pruning, but we prune back the starter. We prune back all of the micros in a percentage so that we don't create an immediate limiting factor.
Yeah.
And those are tangibles, Kayla, that I think that we can do that can make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, going to the 2-day fundamentals of agronomy is going to make a difference.
Yeah. Real quick, we've got a few minutes for questions. So if you want to send in some questions, we've already got our first one. But if you've got specific questions, feel free to include those. Before we get to questions, I want to make a note on one thing you said. You said prorating everything back, so that we're addressing all of those limiting factors. Will you specifically talk about why we don't want to completely cut fertilizer out of the equation when we're using our micros?
Well, specifically there, even if I'm doing a full air feed, and one of the things we can do is we build that foundation. We're going to row place first, right? And then we're going to determine if we want to gamble the extra money on a full air feed or not. And that's dependent upon budget. It's dependent upon what's the crop look like. If we've got a great looking crop, we might want to push it. If it's a little average, we might not. But micronutrients, secondary nutrients, always go into the plant better in the presence of an NPK.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say that to say that no matter what we're doing, we are not going to apply micronutrients with water. We're going to put in some small amount of starter, because that's going to get those in there, and that's going to make everything else work better.
Yeah, absolutely. Our first question came in from Josh, and he was wanting to know more about, making money in the tight markets that we have. And he said, we are pulling soil samples every other year and they have their average yield. So I think what I'm taking from that question is, okay, we know where we're at. How do we know what to focus on moving forward?
Well, that's great that we have those samples, we have those trend lines, as long as we have them on all of the micros.
Yep.
So we know what to address. And I think that we got to look at those tests. And number one, we're looking for trend lines. Are we going up or down? And then number two, is it the complete test? Because we have to. What we're looking for is the limiting factor. How do we spend the same amount of money or even less while addressing that one or two or three things that's really holding us back? And so what Josh would need to do is get, whoever invited him on this, he needs to reach out to and say, here's my test, help me.
Where do we go next?
You bet.
Yep, do that on a case-by-case basis.
Amen.
Robert asked, how important is the Sidekick? We can maybe address what that's doing. Or is that something that I can leave out as long as I'm addressing my micro needs?
And I appreciate that, Robert, but the purpose of the Sidekick is it's potassium thiosulfate, 002517. And what we're doing there, we know that early season K is really important. And so we're trying to force feed more potassium into that plant because potassium doesn't become available till the soil temperature gets to 75 degrees. We're going to force it in there by using that. The sulfur is the plant available product. That sulfate's really important. So my suggestion is if I'm trying to work on a budget, I'm going to take out a gallon of the 318-18 or the 918-9, and I'm going to leave the Sidekick in there because the NP and K typically don't concern me as much as the secondaries and that sulfur, and then the micros are the things that really chew us up. So I'm going to stay with the potassium thiosulfate and save my gallon on another place.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. We had someone ask what soil sample tests we recommend, and I think you kind of rapid fired through those. You maybe want to talk about specifically what those tests are and where somebody could go to get them.
Yeah, again, in the interest of time, I'll just be blunt. We would have you reach out and start working with us. Let's get those tests pulled. We're going to send them to Midwest Labs, and we're going to run the $22 complete SC3 test that's going to look at organic matter CECs. We're going to look at NPK. We're going to look at base saturation rates. We're going to look at the ratios between potassium and mag. We're going to look at the ratios between potassium and zinc. We're going to look at the ratios between P1 and P2. And we're going to look at all those different things. But quite honestly, that we believe strongly, as my mentor said yesterday, we're going to stick with Midwest Labs because we've got a track record here that says if they make a change, it was the right change. They've studied, and their extraction methods are extremely up to date.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that $22 test. If you're looking to find it not through us and send it on your own, it's $26.50. So if you're like, I want to go send this in and I'm not seeing a $22 test, that's why. But like he said, it's the complete test. You've mentioned the importance of just being candid. This really isn't a year to sugarcoat things and beat around the bush. And Tyler asked, what do you charge to look over soil samples when we pull them? Typically, I know we don't talk about how we do business when we're trying to present education, because we don't ever want to withhold any education. But I think because it's important to just be direct moving into 2025, do you want to talk a little bit about what it looks like if we were to look over some soil samples and kind of how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bottom line is this. We do not do consulting for a fee. And our team does not do consulting for a fee. We have a lot of greatly, highly trained people who are good people with a great heart. But all of us work the same way. If you work with us and you use our products, then our consulting is free. If you don't work with us, we will not be involved in that. And the reason, Kayla, you know this, the reason is simple. I had someone today ask me that, will you do this? I was like, no, I won't, because I can look at your test. Number one problem is I got to take for granted that their extraction methods were good. Mm-hmm. And I have limited faith in that. And even if they use Midwest Labs but don't come through us, then it comes back to we make a recommendation and then they go to town and they try and find something and they find something that's a lot cheaper. Well, there's a reason that it's cheaper. When we make recommendations, it's based on a specific quality of product. And if we don't have that specific quality, we're not going to get the specific results. And today we're more focused on results than anything else, and so the short answer is no, we don't consult for money. We're just going to work with them and help them to the best of our ability.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone made a comment. They said, I'm tired of getting my fertilizer recommendation based off my soil samples from the same guy selling me fertilizer. Can you talk about the importance of being able to understand your own soil samples so that you can make those decisions for yourself and really take that control back?
Yeah, and make no mistake, we're looking at the soil test and we're selling, and I get that. But number one, we're going to have an independent person pull the test, or you're going to pull them. You pulling them is our first choice, as we teach you how to do it. Then we're going to talk about how you can read these tests on your own, and you don't need us. We're here. We're happy to help. But our goal is to empower the people so that they are confident that they can go do what they need to do without us. And then I think that it bothers me. When we were in Burnsville, I had 3 different people tell me they're so frustrated because they've paid for tests every year, and every year they need 150 pounds of DAP, need 200 pounds of potash. And they're like, why are we soil testing if that's what we're going to get? And they've never actually seen their soil test. They've only seen the recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
When someone works with us, as you well know, Kayla, page 1 is analytical work. Here's all the analytics. And on that same page is a dry broadcast program. We do not hold you hostage. You have the ability to go to town and buy a dry broadcast program. It'll be different than what they're going to recommend to you in town, and it will be to your benefit to do that if you choose that's what you're going to do. And then if you decide you really want to make a difference and you want to go into knowing that liquid is better to get into the plant, knowing all of the things that goes into that, the soil solution and all those things, then page 2 is specific recommendations, and they're specific down to ounces per acre.
Yeah.
That when we say specific, we're not talking give or take 100 pounds. We're talking down to the exact ounce per acre.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of, the people that we've got to see so far at our Fundamentals of Agronomy programs this year. I think of Rob, who was just with us in Burnsville, and he came in saying, I've never even looked at a soil test before. I don't know where to start with this thing. Here's all my soil tests. I want you to tell me what to do. And I said, I want to talk about this after we're done at this 2-day meeting. And at the end of the first night, he pulls me aside and he said, okay, so Kayla, so my P1 and my P2, since they're at this ratio, do you think I should do this or should we do that? And I think that's what I enjoy, is being able to have that conversation, because you know your farm, you know where the old hog barn used to be, you know the equipment you have, you know what you have access to. So when we can have that conversation together, instead of me just handing you a rec sheet, I think that's where those stories like Chris and Kurt and Dan come from, is because we're working together.
Yeah, and it's a team. That's the whole thing. It's not us telling you what to do. It's us working with you, and I think it's the things that really drive us here at A Better Way to Farm is, number one, just the results. Having the people reach out to us, send us the yield maps and say, hey, this was last year when we didn't know you, and this is this year when we do know you. Those are really gratifying. And then number 2, to see that light bulb come on Rob's face up there on Tuesday night.
Yep.
When he went from, I don't know anything about this, to, hey, this makes sense. All of a sudden the picture became clear. And so I just, really love doing that. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll turn it to you to wrap things up here. Guys, thank you. We know you could have been doing a million different things tonight, and you took a little bit of time out of your night to spend it with us, and we don't take that for granted. We're so grateful that there's people on this call who are like-minded, who want to succeed in 2025. And I guess my thoughts would be that whether you reach out to us and say, hey, how can we get started working together? Whether you change where you soil test from, whether you have done the same thing for 30 years and you try one thing differently this year, it is not too late to get started this year. There is so much time to completely change the trajectory of your 2025. And so my ask, as Dad said, a 14th generation farmer, as someone who loves production agriculture, as someone who is so passionate about the people that we get to talk to every day, my ask for me to you would be that you do one thing different. You take one step toward change and see where that can take you in 2025.
I think that was great advice, sis. I got a couple things I want to close with, and they just came to me. While we were up there, I was talking with one of Brian's guys, and he was talking about the fact that 20 years ago, his dad got some byproduct. I think it was city sludge, and that they got tremendous amounts of P&K out of it, and their P&K tests are really high on that farm. But that farm has never yielded like farms with lesser soil tests. And we are working to isolate and try and figure out what happened there. Guys, as we look through the industry right now, we start reading and we start studying, we see these companies that are being sued because they have the PFAs, the forever chemicals, and they're selling some kind of a byproduct. And they always come to you. And guys, when someone comes to you with something that's free, please walk away slowly. If you run, you'll trip. They'll catch you. Walk, but walk away. And I see, because here's the problem. That farmer was very sad. He was like, how do I take this heavy metal or this PFA or whatever this toxin is that's in my soil out, and there's no chance. There's no method to remove too much of a cadmium or an arsenic or a lead or a mercury. And those things all displace potassium. They all drive potassium off the soil colloid. And so I really want to caution you guys in these hard times, when it's too good to be true, please be cautious. Please be cautious, because we don't want to put any PFAs into our soil. We don't want any forever chemicals out there that are going to kill our kids. And we don't want to get some toxic metal in there that we don't have any way to get rid of. And so be cautious with that. And that was not what my close was. What I want to say is this, guys. There's only one thing in the world. Well, there's two. There's two things that never change. There's God. Okay, we know that. But the other thing that never changes is there's always change. And if we're not changing, we are doing it wrong. Some of us are still doing exactly what dad or grandpa did. And we're not getting the results that we want. So we got to embrace that change and figure out, as you said, Kayla, do something different this year. And then the second thing I just want to close with is this. Somebody cared enough about you to take the time to invite you to be here. And you are looking for something, or you wouldn't have came. And I want to encourage you, reach back out to that person and say, hey, what's the next step? In the event that somehow you stumbled onto this without anybody, you can text Karen at 641-919-5570 and just say, get started. And then we'll try to figure out who was that sent you here. But guys, we really want to help you get started. We want to help you make a difference. We want to help you make a change. And we want to see you guys. We would be honored if we could meet you at one of our upcoming events so that you could have that moment that Rob had, when all of a sudden your face breaks into a smile and you go, I get this. And this is why I need to do this differently. Because you too, just like all the others, can be really different. And guys, I just want you to think about this as I let you go. What will it be like? Use that question. Ask yourself, what will it be like when I lower my cost of my corn production by 50 cents a bushel? What will it be like when I figure out how to spend the same amount of money on my soybeans and get rid of this miserable 50 bushel average that I've had and move to 70? What will it be like? That's what we're talking about. Hope you guys have a blessed evening. We'll look forward to talking to you at the next Fundamentals of Agronomy.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night.